Right, we are in section 4.7, congruence and overlapping triangles. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we want to know what common angle do triangle ACD and ECB share. So when you pull them out, you can see that ACD has angle C and ECB has angle C. So the common angle they share is angle C. So let me put it got it. See it. There we go. Try letter A. What's the common side of ABD and BCA? Alright, moving on to we are given that angle VXW is congruent to YXW. We are also given that ZWX is congruent to YWX. So we want to prove that ZW is congruent to YX. So let's first draw a clear picture. Alright, so this is what it is. ZWX is congruent to Y. The XW is congruent to YWX. The WX is congruent to YXW. So we want to prove that these two sides of the triangle are equal. So when we prove that, let's start with our given. These two angles are congruent to each other, and these two angles are congruent to each other. So now that we have these two angles congruent to each other and these two, there is a postulate that we can use. So first, right, so now I want to say that WX is congruent to WX, and that's because of the reflexive property. And therefore, these two triangles are congruent to each other because of ASA. We have these two angles are congruent to each other, these two, and the side, therefore angle, side, angle. Alright, and then because we said that these two triangles are congruent, we can now state that ZW is congruent to YX because corresponding parts to a corresponding triangle are congruent. Corresponding parts of a congruent triangle are congruent. Alright, so triangle. Right here. Alright, let's move on to problem 3. We are given that you're given these two triangles. E is the midpoint of AC and DB. I know you can't really see that. Alright, the triangle GED is congruent to, you want to prove that triangle GED is congruent to JEB. Alright, so for two-column proof, let's start with a given. E is the midpoint of AC and DB, because that's the given. Alright, so after we do that, we can automatically say that AE is congruent to EC and BE is congruent to ED because definition of a midpoint. Alright, after that, so now we have this side is congruent to this side. Alright, and then this side is congruent to this side. So now we have two sides. All we want to do now is prove two angles are congruent. So AED is congruent to angle BEC. So therefore, we have these two sides, these two angles, and these two sides. So therefore, by SAS, these two big triangles are congruent to each other. These two triangles are congruent to each other. So now that we have that, now we can move on to the little triangles. So because these two triangles are congruent, angle D is congruent to angle B because corresponding parts of the congruent triangle are congruent. So now we have that, I want to prove the little angles. So GED down here is congruent to angle BEJ. Because of what? Because of vertical angles. So we're going back to what we learned before. Now, you can say that because we have this side congruent to this side, this angle congruent to this angle, and this angle congruent to this angle up here, we can now say that this triangle is congruent to this triangle because of ASA. So, got it over here. Let's move on to problem 4. Alright. Okay. We're given that CA is congruent to CE and BA is congruent to DE. What we want to prove is BX is congruent to DX. So first, let us state what's our given. So we say that BA is congruent to DE and CA is congruent to CE because of our givens. After that, we can also say that angle CAE is congruent to angle CEA because it's an isosceles triangle. It's a property of isosceles. And we know it's isosceles because CA is congruent to CE. So that's definition of isosceles. The property is that these two angles are congruent. Right, and then we can say that AE is congruent to itself because of the reflexive property. Therefore, triangle BAE and triangle DEA are congruent because of SAS. So now we related this big triangle to these little two triangles. So now what we want to do is try to get these two little triangles. So now we can say angle ABE and triangle EDA are congruent because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So because these are congruent, we can already say that these two angles are congruent. So now we can say that BXA and DXE are congruent because of vertical angles. And then, now we can say that these two triangles equal each other because of AAS. These two angles are congruent, these two angles are congruent, and the sides are congruent because that was our given. So therefore, we can say that this BX is congruent to DX because these two triangles are congruent, these two sides must be congruent. So, I've got it down here.